Hi, my name's Lyle. I'm 78 years old. I thought I'd spend my final years in the house I built with my wife, Miriam. I thought I'd be surrounded by love, not silence. But my son moved in with his wife and kids, and slowly, without yelling, without a single slammed door, I disappeared. They replaced my bedroom, replaced my name on the mailbox, even installed hidden cameras in my living room. Then one morning, I found a letter admitting me to a nursing facility I never signed up for. And still, I stayed quiet. But silence doesn't mean weakness. They thought they could push me out of my own home. But what if I never left? What if I came back with someone holding the deed in his briefcase? Would you like to know what happened when they saw his face? When they realized I was never the guest in that house? Want to hear how my daughter-in-law turned pale? The morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, catching in the steam rising from my tea. I'd always appreciated that quiet hour between waking and the day beginning, before phones rang, before the neighborhood came alive. I had just stirred in a spoonful of honey when I heard the rumble of tires on gravel. That sound never used to bother me. This time, though, it felt different. I looked out the window and saw Denton's SUV crawling up the driveway, not alone, not empty. I stepped onto the porch, robe still tied loosely at my waist. The doors of the vehicle swung open in practiced unison, like a well-rehearsed act. Denton emerged first, then Tamara, her sunglasses perched high, face unreadable. Ronan popped the trunk while Brielle tugged along a wheeled suitcase almost her height. There were 6 bags in total. One of them had a dog carrier. A dog. We thought it'd be nice to stay for a bit while our house gets renovated, Tamara said, smiling like this wasn't news. I forced my own smile small, unsure, and nodded. After lunch, which Tamara insisted on preparing, Denton sat beside me in the living room, his fingers playing nervously with the hem of his shirt. Maybe you should move downstairs, Dad. Just for convenience, he said. Before I could speak, Tamara chimed in from the doorway, carrying 2 glasses of lemon water. It's just until the reno's done, and honestly, the master bedroom gets better light for Ronan's classes. He's doing video work now. I looked up toward the staircase, the same steps Miriam and I had walked up together for 45 years. The same room where we had whispered through anniversaries and mourned losses in quiet together. I gave a short nod. I'll get my things. The next hour moved like water through a clogged pipe. I folded my shirt slowly, pausing over Miriam's favorite sweater. Her nightgown still hung where I'd left it in the closet, untouched. I didn't touch it now either. I just stood and stared. I slipped a photo from the dresser Miriam and I in Maine, 1982. The corners were bent, but we were smiling like people who had no idea the best days were already happening. I folded the picture and tucked it into my shirt pocket near my chest. Then I picked up my bag and closed the bedroom door behind me like I was leaving a hotel I hadn't planned to visit. That evening, we had dinner outside. Tamara decorated the table with cloth napkins and reusable plates, talking about composting and sustainability like it mattered more than the air between us. I was handed a separate plate, plain, steamed vegetables, no butter, no salt. Ronan mumbled between bites. This house finally feels fresh, not like that old smell before. Nobody flinched, except me. I didn't say anything, didn't even lift my eyes. Later that night, I sat on the edge of the guest room bed, if you could call it that. The mattress was stiff, the ceiling lower than I remembered, and the small window faced the garage, not the bay. I listened to the crackle of the fireplace upstairs. Tamara must have lit it. Miriam used to love reading by that fire. I imagined her up there now, legs curled beneath her, eyes scanning pages with me beside her. It's just for a few weeks, I told myself. But that feeling in my chest, it said otherwise. Before bed, I opened my phone. A photo of Denton at age 5 filled the screen, his gap-toothed grin taking up the frame. He used to crawl into our bed after nightmares, used to hold my hand without needing a reason. You wouldn't have done this to me when you were 5, I thought, but I didn't type it, didn't say it. I just turned the screen off and stared at the ceiling. As I turned off the light, I told myself it was temporary, but deep down, I knew something permanent had shifted. The smell of lemon cleaner still lingered in the hallway as I stepped out of my room the next morning. Upstairs, someone was laughing, probably Tamara recording something again. I padded into the living room with my mug, ready to start my quiet routine, but what I saw made me stop mid-step. The photo of Miriam and me was gone. It used to sit centered on the mantel, above the fireplace, a black and white image from our wedding day, her smile soft and unforced. In its place now was a modern print, Tamara, Denton, Brielle, and Ronan, all in matching khakis on a beach somewhere. The kind of photo that screams we have it all figured out, even when you know better. I looked around. The old frame was there. Yes, but not where it belonged. It sat on the floor, half hidden behind a basket of throw blankets, face down. Dust had already begun to settle on the glass. I bent to pick it up, but stopped short when Tamara came in, humming. She didn't look at me, just started rearranging the spring-themed decorations on the bookshelf, dried lavender in a repurposed wine bottle, tiny ceramic birds with pastel beaks. This new setup feels lighter, she said, more to the room than to me. I didn't reply. I held the mug a little tighter and sat on the edge of the sofa that used to be mine. At breakfast, I got the same saltless, butterless plate as yesterday. Tamara handed it over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good for your heart, Lyle. She said my name the way people say sir when they're trying to make a point. Brielle avoided my gaze as she stirred her oatmeal. Ronan, chewing carelessly, blurted out, "The whole house smells different now, right?" Tamara laughed. Fresh energy. I didn't speak. My eyes drifted to the hallway, to the stairs that used to lead to my life, the room I'd built, the meals Miriam had made, the smell of pine wood and old books. They weren't just cleaning, they were erasing. Later that afternoon, I went into the garage looking for a screwdriver. That's when I saw the box old decor, storage scribbled in red. Inside, wrapped in a towel, was the picture frame. I lifted it gently. The glass was cold. The image inside hadn't changed, but my face in it. Something about it no longer felt familiar. My hand was on Miriam's waist in the picture, like I'd been protecting her. But now, standing there in the dim light of the garage, I felt like the one who needed guarding. I brought the frame upstairs and set it on the nightstand in my new room. The smile in the photo looked back at me, not judging, not accusing, just there, like Miriam always had been. They didn't ask, I whispered. They just moved everything. That evening, I thought I might find comfort in routine. I went to the living room and switched on the old radio, the same one Miriam used to turn on when she cooked. A scratchy jazz tune filled the space, the kind that reminded me of lazy Sundays and long hugs. Tamara came out from the kitchen, holding a ring light and her phone. "Would you mind switching that off?" she said, tight-lipped. "I'm filming content for a new client." I turned the dial without protest. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was absence. The room looked like a catalog now. Throw pillows with tags still attached. A stack of hardcover books, with spines uncracked, no warmth, no clutter, no sign that someone had once fallen asleep there with a paperback across their chest. I went for a walk before dinner. The breeze off the bay hadn't changed. Same gulls circling above. Same boardwalk groaning under my feet. Mrs. Harper from 2 houses down waved, but didn't slow her step. She didn't ask how I was or whether I was still living here. Maybe she didn't know what to say, or maybe she did and chose silence. When I got back, Tamara's car was parked in the exact spot where Miriam had planted her lavender. The flowers were gone now, paved over for convenience. I stood at the kitchen doorway before dinner. Tamara was chopping vegetables while her phone buzzed from the counter. Something about the way the kitchen smelled sterile, lemony, clean felt unfamiliar, too clean. I turned and walked back to my room. Ronan passed me on the stairs and said casually, "Good. The place smells cleaner without all that old stuff." That night, I looked at the photo on my nightstand. It stared back without judgment, just like Miriam always had. The house was getting quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that made your ears ring a little, like a space was holding its breath and waiting for you to finally give up and leave. I hadn't said much since that comment from Ronan the night before. Honestly, I hadn't known what I could say that would land. Words didn't seem to mean anything in that house anymore. At lunch, I reached for a dish to help set the table. Tamara stepped in front of me, wiping her hands on a pristine apron. "Just rest. Lyle, we've got it. Don't worry about anything." She smiled, like I was a guest being over-accommodated at a bed and breakfast, not a man still listed as the legal homeowner. I backed off, not because I was tired, but because it was clear my involvement wasn't welcome. Ronan had already pulled a chair to the far end of the kitchen, near the fridge. "Here's your spot." "Grandpa," he said, without looking up from his phone. I sat quietly. When I tried to comment on the soup being too thin, Tamara immediately changed the topic to Brielle's upcoming scholarship interview. Every time I tried to reclaim a little space, they filled it with their own noise. After the meal, I took a slow walk through the hallway that had once been lined with familiar photographs. Now, the centerpiece was a large frame shot of Denton, Tamara, and the kids standing in front of the house. The photo of Miriam and me, which had hung in that same spot for decades, had been moved. I found it on the stair landing, in a narrow frame too small for the image, hanging crooked on the wall like an afterthought. No one asked me if it was okay. I guess no one thought they needed to. I went out to the garage later that afternoon, mostly out of habit. The faucet in the guest bathroom had been dripping, and I thought maybe if I fixed anything, I'd feel useful again. As I looked for the wrench, my eyes landed on a stack of cardboard boxes in the corner. One had red marker on the side. Old stuff. Donate. I opened it. Inside were books Miriam had loved, old gardening guides, her cookbook with notes in the margins. Beneath that were cassette tapes I'd recorded in the early 80s, mixtapes I used to play on long drives, letters from her to me, folded neatly but stored like someone else's trash. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and just stared. For how long? I couldn't say. My fingers rested on a note she'd written in blue ink. "Don't forget bread and milk. And kiss me when you get home." The ache started in my chest but didn't move past my throat. I didn't cry. Not there. Not with their fresh energy humming above me. I needed air. So I walked. The boardwalk near the bay had always been a place I could think. I nodded at Ruth, who used to bring us pies back when Miriam was alive. She looked surprised to see me. "I haven't seen you around much lately," she said, slowing her stride. The house is busier now, I replied, forcing a smile. She tilted her head slightly, then asked, "You still own it?" "Right." That one hit harder than I expected. I chuckled like it was funny, but inside, it felt like something had been punctured. I couldn't even answer her honestly because I didn't know if ownership meant anything when your presence could be erased so easily. I got back just as the sun began to slide low across the roofline. I paused at the stairwell and stared again at the wedding photo Miriam and I, younger, alive in a way we no longer were. The living room beyond was bright, professionally arranged for Tamara's content shoots. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was mine. I walked upstairs, took down the photo, and brought it back to my room. As I hung it beside the window, it occurred to me that this was what eviction looked like now. Not yelling, not locks changed, just quiet adjustments. Until one day you couldn't remember what felt like home anymore. Dinner came and went with little conversation. I ate my plate in the kitchen while the others ate in the dining room, laughing over something Ronan had said. I didn't ask what. I didn't want to know. Once the place is fully redone, it'll be a killer rental spot, Ronan said loud enough for me to hear. Tamara nodded, eyes on her phone. Content for Haven starts next week. I sat with my back to them, chewing slowly. My thoughts weren't on the food. I wanted to ask, where do I fit into Haven? But the answer was already written on the walls, in the way they spoke, in what they didn't say. They were redesigning everything, including the story of this house, and I was no longer part of the narrative. That night, I took the photo of Miriam and me and flipped it over. With a black Sharpie, I wrote her name on the back in block letters, like it needed claiming. Then I tucked it behind the nightstand drawer, in the space between the wood and the wall, just in case I forgot who I was. I woke up knowing that silence had run its course. That afternoon, the house hummed with its usual chaos, clatter from the upstairs hallway, Tamara's voice floating between rooms, giving directions I was never meant to follow. I walked into the living room and, for the first time in days, I didn't just sit. I stood in front of the stereo cabinet, pulled out a vinyl Miles Davis, kind of blue, and placed the needle carefully onto the groove. The room filled with something I hadn't heard in weeks, me. The smooth trumpet and gentle bass gave a shape to the air, like breathing after holding it too long. I sat in my chair and let it wash over me. That was when Tamara appeared, arms crossed, brows tight. "I'm filming sponsored content. Could you turn that off? Please." Her voice cut through the rhythm like a blade. I reached for the remote and clicked the music off. But this time, I didn't sigh or smile to smooth things over. I just stared straight ahead. My fingers curled tightly around the remote. She turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. Evening came with a stillness that felt staged. The scent of lemons lingered in the air, a synthetic freshness replacing what was once real. I walked past the bookshelf near the staircase and noticed a faint blinking light tucked behind a row of hardcover cookbooks. Curious. I leaned closer and pulled the books back. There it was, a small, rectangular object with a pinhole lens and a blue LED. A camera. It was discreetly mounted, facing outward from the middle shelf, positioned just right to capture the living room. I didn't remember agreeing to this. I knelt down, studied the wiring, the brand, the placement. It wasn't plugged into anything obvious. It was clearly meant to blend in, not a baby monitor, not something you'd use to keep an eye on a stove. This was deliberate. I touched the cold plastic shell and whispered to no one. Was it always about safety or control? I waited until Denton came home. I heard the door shut and his keys hit the counter. I asked him to join me in the kitchen. He looked tired, probably from work or the pretense of living under the same roof as someone you didn't want to see. "Did you install cameras in my room?" I asked directly. His eyes darted to the hallway, then back to mine. "It's Tamara's idea. For your safety." "Dad?" Then why wasn't I told? Before he could respond, Tamara walked in, still holding her phone. "Because you always resist what's good for you. Lyle, you don't see how fragile you've become." I looked at both of them. I said nothing more, just walked past them, through the kitchen door, and out to the porch. It was the first time I realized their respect had a ceiling, and I had already bumped my head against it too many times. Later, I tried to call Brielle. She picked up on the second ring. "Grandpa, I just wanted to hear your voice. Talk for a minute. Sorry. I've got a full workload this week. Finals are next week, and Mom's got me doing some editing for her videos too." There was a long pause. I decided to ask anyway. "Have you heard them talk about the Haven?" "What is it? Really?" More silence. "I don't know the details," she said, softly. "Okay," I replied. "Thanks for picking up." I hung up before she could feel guilty. Dinner came and went. I didn't join them. The sound of laughter floated down from upstairs. Denton's voice, Tamara's louder chuckle, Ronan's excited bursts. It reminded me of when Miriam was alive. We used to laugh too, at old game shows and spilled gravy. But this was a different sound. Laughter not meant for me. I looked up at the small camera blinking silently above the mantel and took a kitchen towel from the drawer. I draped it over the lens and left it that way. Around 10, there was a knock at my door. Dad Denton's voice, softer than usual. "Tamara's just trying to help." I opened the door a sliver and met his eyes. "Help usually involves asking first," I said. He nodded, awkwardly, and left me alone. That night, I didn't sleep, and in the silence, I made a decision not to leave, but to stay, differently. The decision had been made, but not by them. Saturday afternoon, a week since they moved in. I walked into the storage room hoping to find the old air purifier Miriam used when spring pollen got bad. The room was lit by the slanted light from the back window, dust dancing like memories in the air. Tamara and Ronan were in there already, boxing things, labeling with black Sharpie on bright orange stickers. I paused in the doorway. One of the boxes read, "Goodwill, donation, old bedroom." Inside, I saw familiar things. Miriam's wedding dress, pressed and yellowing. Our photo album, the thick one with leather corners and handwritten captions. Her recipe books, dog-eared and dotted with oil stains. I stood still for a long moment, hands by my sides. Tamara looked up briefly. "They were just taking space," she said, almost kindly, as if explaining why the fridge had to be emptied. I didn't answer. I just stepped back out of the room and closed the door. But inside, something cracked. The next morning, I went to check the mailbox like I always did. Still liked the sound of the metal squeaking open, even if nothing worth reading ever came. But today, there was a thick envelope addressed to me. The sender was Pine Haven Residential Care Facility. I opened it on the porch. There was no breeze, yet the paper trembled in my hands. Inside a formal acceptance letter, my name, a room number, and a move-in date. Monday. No one had said a word to me. I took the envelope inside and placed it on the kitchen table. I waited until Denton and Tamara finished their conversation about some appliance install and called them over. "What is this?" I asked, tapping the letter without raising my voice. Denton avoided eye contact. Tamara didn't. She leaned on the counter, crossed her arms. "It's just a safety plan, in case anything happens." In case I repeated, "You've had moments," she said. "Forgetfulness. You nearly left the stove on." "It was warming soup," I said flatly, "and I was standing right there." Tamara shrugged. "It's not meant to be punishment. It's a solution." "Did you already decide when I'd be moved out?" No one answered. I stood, took the letter, and walked away. I wasn't angry in the traditional sense. Something colder had replaced the heat in my room. I opened the closet and took down a small canvas bag from the top shelf. I placed the photo album inside, then folded the letter and slid it on top. I added a few more things, an old tie of Miriam's, the last birthday card she wrote me, a cassette labeled Christmas '87. They were preparing to remove me, but this time I would prepare too. That afternoon, I sat on the edge of my bed and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Carlton picked up after 2 rings. "Lyle," he said, voice still deep as ever. "You still alive?" "Barely," I said. "You sound tired. I need help." I explained everything: the move-in, the unspoken rearrangements, the envelope. "They moved in without a title transfer," he asked. "Sharp now. The house is still in my name." "Then maybe," he said, "it's time you start thinking like an owner again." The next hour, we discussed next steps. Nothing dramatic yet, but it was the first time in a week I felt like I wasn't disappearing. That night, the house smelled like overcooked pasta and garlic bread from a jar. I sat at the dinner table, eating silently. No one mentioned the letter. Brielle sat across from me. She glanced up once, then quickly away. I couldn't tell if she knew or guessed, or just sensed something had shifted. I reached into my pocket and touched the folded piece of paper I'd written earlier. It had only one sentence: "They've already started removing me." I didn't read it again, just held it. After dinner, I walked back to my room, past the same hallway where Miriam's photo used to hang. I looked at the envelope again. This wasn't a warning. It was a countdown. Silence had been my defense. Now it would be my weapon. Monday morning, I opened the drawer in my nightstand, looking for my bank ledger. I hadn't touched it in weeks, and I wanted to review some numbers before I called Carlton again. As I reached inside, my fingers brushed a stiff sheet tucked between old receipts and a bookmark I'd never used. I pulled it out. My name stared back at me in bold, unmistakable ink. It was a copy of a power of attorney form, not just medical, like Tamara once mentioned when I was down with the flu. This one gave full legal and financial authority to her and Denton. The date on the bottom matched that week in February when I was half awake, feverish, and trusting. Back then, she'd said, just a simple healthcare proxy. Dad, in case of emergency. I remembered signing something. I didn't remember this. I held the document to the light, ran my finger along my own signature. It was mine. That's what made it worse. The kitchen smelled like over-toasted bread when I walked in. I placed the paper on the table without saying a word. Denton was scrolling his phone, coffee mug steaming beside him. "You did sign it," he said, not looking up. "I know," I replied. "But did you know what it was?" Before he could answer, Tamara entered, holding a protein bar and a calendar planner. "We didn't trick you," she said, voice even. "We simplified things. You needed help back then." "Did you simplify it for me or for yourselves?" I asked. Neither of them answered. I stood there for a moment longer, then picked the paper back up and walked away. Later that day, I called Carlton. I sat in my room with the door shut, the blinds half drawn, and read him the contents word for word. He listened quietly, then said, "If the house is still under your name, they have no legal right to kick you out. But what if they take this to court?" I said, tapping the paper, "and convince someone I'm no longer competent?" There was a pause on the line. Then you're not just being removed from your house, Carlton said. You're being erased. I leaned back in my chair, the silence ringing louder than his words. Outside my door, I heard Brielle's laugh and the clatter of silverware. The house was alive, just not with me in it. I walked out later that afternoon and stepped into the living room. The air smelled sharply of lemon oil, a new scent, not Miriam's lavender, not mine. The coffee table had been cleared of my books. Instead, a sleek leather folder sat center stage. The label, The Haven Project. Inside were diagrams, renderings, bullet points, guest room bookings, target demographics, renovation budgets, everything meticulously detailed. In all the charts and plans, not once did I see my name, but in the margin, written in neat cursive, were the words owner status pending, transfer in legal review. That evening, I dialed Carlton again. He didn't sound surprised when I said, "Let's set the meeting," with the buyer. His response came with, "Wait. All right. Let's talk tomorrow morning." I hung up, then I stood, pulled the blinds closed, and turned off the lights. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even scared. I was done being the background character in my own house. Dinner that night passed without my presence. I stayed in my room, the envelope from Pine Haven still tucked under my pillow. I didn't need to read it again. I knew what it said. I knew what it meant. I lay down, pulled the blanket over my chest, and turned off the lamp. For the first time in weeks, I slept. No dreams. No questions. They had taken what they thought was mine. Now it was my turn. It wasn't spite. It was self-respect, long overdue. That morning, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and yogurt, Tamara's new breakfast brand routine. She was filming again, the ring light making her skin look porcelain smooth, even under our old ceiling fan. Ronan sat at the bar stool, munching on toast and watching her through the phone screen. He chuckled between bites. "Once we launch the Haven, this place will book out like crazy." He didn't whisper. He didn't hesitate. He just said it like we were already there. Like that was the world now. The Haven. Tamara kept filming, barely flinched. Denton glanced at me over the rim of his mug, but quickly looked away. No one corrected Ronan. No one included me. After breakfast, I stepped outside, walked the same loop around the block that Miriam and I used to do every Tuesday. The camellias she planted had bloomed in full. I bent down to pick a fallen one, brought it back inside. When I returned, the house was empty, grocery run, or maybe one of those school things Brielle had been juggling. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the place was quiet enough to let a man think. I passed the dining table and stopped. There, spread out like it was waiting for eyes, was a full-color layout. Title in bold, The Haven Boutique Coastal Rental, launch date TBD. Under it, architectural renderings, digital mock-ups, rooms rearranged, walls gone, furniture replaced. The corner where our family piano once sat would now be a cozy espresso bar nook. The garage had flexible space potential scrawled in red marker. The guest room had a label, Studio Option A. I flipped the page. Budget projections, photography equipment costs, potential influencer collaborations, and near the top corner of the last sheet, scribbled lightly in pencil, owner status pending, title transfer in legal review. There was no grandpa suite, no Lyle's office, no nod to who built this house or buried love in every brick. That afternoon, Brielle came home early half-day schedule. She dropped her backpack by the door and headed to the fridge, stopping short when she saw me holding the layout. I didn't hide it. Her eyes widened. She froze, lips parting just a little. You knew I asked gently. She hesitated. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't press. I just nodded and folded the papers neatly. She left the room without saying anything else. That night, we all gathered for dinner like nothing had shifted, except everything had. They spoke excitedly about tourism trends, Airbnb competition, and seasonal pricing. The coastal traffic is shifting, Tamara said, twirling pasta. We're sitting on gold, Ronan chimed in, mouth still full. We could turn the garage into a mini studio. Denton looked at his plate and said nothing. I smiled and nodded when expected, but inside, a different current was building, one I didn't plan to ignore much longer. After the dishes were cleared, I called Carlton. You ready to move forward? He asked. Yes, I said. Set it up. I'll meet the buyer. There was a pause. Do they know? No, I said. And they won't. Not until the contract's signed. That night, after everyone had gone upstairs, I stood in what used to be our living room. Now it looked like a commercial set ring lights, reflectors, a soft box labeled Tam Cam Season 2. Notes pinned to a corkboard read, Color palette driftwood beige, seafoam accent. There was a half-finished glass of wine on the side table and a mock-up printout of the redesigned fireplace. Where Miriam's photo used to hang was a pale wall empty, scrubbed of warmth. I opened the drawer below the TV cabinet and retrieved my own folder, a photocopy of the deed, last updated when Miriam and I refinanced 10 years ago. Her name, my name, no one else's. I slipped the document into the inside pocket of my jacket. They had plans for this house. I had one of my own. Saturday morning broke with a chill in the air, one of those spring mornings that smelled more like the tail end of winter. I was already dressed when the sun came up, my best slacks on, my collar pressed. Not for a funeral, not for church, but for something far more personal. I met Carlton at our usual cafe, tucked along the marina where the coffee tasted like burnt almonds, but the quiet made it worth it. He slid a folder across the table toward me, signed, reviewed, ready to go, he said. My hand rested on the folder without opening it. Do we let them know? First I asked. Carlton shook his head, firm but not unkind. No. We walk in and let the paper speak. By the time I got back to the house, the cars had arrived, not just Denton's and Tamara's. There was a shiny silver BMW in the driveway, Tamara's parents', no doubt, and another I didn't recognize. A sedan with dark-tinted windows and a license plate that screamed out-of-state wealth inside. Tamara was bustling around, setting up what looked like a miniature conference. Laptop, water bottles, neatly printed agendas. Her parents sat side by side on the couch, postured like statues. Across from them were two younger men in suits, eyes scanning iPads. When I stepped in, Tamara didn't even look up. Lyle, we're just having a quick family business meeting. We'll be done soon. I smiled. Good. I'm family. Aren't I? The room fell quiet, but no one corrected me. That was all I needed. Then the door opened again. Carlton entered first, his leather shoes tapping like a gavel on hardwood. Behind him came a man I'd never seen before, tall, thin, black coat over a navy blue suit, silver-rimmed glasses resting just above a steady expression. He carried a brown leather case. Good morning, Carlton said calmly. Everyone, this is Mr. Reuben Voss, the new owner of this property, or he will be, in about 7 minutes. The silence was instant and surgical. Tamara blinked like she'd been slapped. Denton stood up, face pale. Her father let out a sound half cough, half stunned grunt. Her mother's fingers curled around the armrest so tightly I thought the fabric might rip. Reuben, cool as sunrise, opened his case, placed a thin stack of papers on the table, and began. "All legal," he said. "Transfer filed. Payment secured. Inspection done. We are well within the window to finalize today." Tamara lunged from her chair. "You can't sell the house. He's not well." Carlton, without missing a beat, held up a separate folder. "This is a medical certification, conducted independently. Mr. Lyle Bennett is of sound mind and body. That was verified 2 weeks ago." Denton started to speak something about family and misunderstanding, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "You had your meeting," I said, looking at both of them. "This is mine." Reuben continued with quiet professionalism, flipping through the contract, showing the necessary lines, initials, signatures. Carlton stood beside him like a shield, calm and ready. Tamara looked at me with something between panic and betrayal. "You tricked us. You waited." I looked her in the eye, voice steady. "No, I endured. There's a difference." No one spoke after that. Reuben finished laying out the documents and looked at me. I nodded. We shook hands. Then he turned to the room. "You'll have 30 days to vacate," he said flatly. "After that, the house belongs to me, and the guest house he turned to me is already prepped for occupancy." Tamara sat down hard. Denton, still standing, had nothing to say, nothing worth saying. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile, but I did feel something crack loose inside me, something that had been tight and suffocating for weeks. When I stepped outside, the sky had turned a soft blue, thin clouds drifting like they'd just heard the truth too. I walked across the porch and looked out over the bay, where the light danced like coins in a fountain. Carlton joined me for a second, handed me a key. "Temporary place Reuben set up," he said, "until the guest house is yours again. Few weeks. Tops." I nodded, pocketed the key. I didn't just get my house back. I got my name back. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, no one was telling me where I belonged. The house behind me was filled with silence now, but for once, it wasn't mine to carry. Sunday morning came with no sound. The air was still, and the bay outside the guest house barely moved. I rose early, dressed, and took a long walk down by the breakwater. The sky was low with fog, and for once, even the birds kept to themselves. No one called my name. No one peeked out from the kitchen window. It was as if the day itself had agreed to keep its distance. By the time I returned, the side of the house was cluttered with black garbage bags stacked hastily near the compost bin. Torn wrapping paper, cracked picture frames, old curtains. Near the top of one bag, I spotted a sliver of blue ribbon Miriam once used for holiday presents. Next to the bags was a board with a scrawled note. "Don't throw away without checking with Tamara." Of course. In the kitchen, I found Brielle already seated. She didn't speak when I entered, just sat there, quietly picking at a piece of toast. Her eyes were dull, the kind that carried the weight of knowledge you're too young to hold. Then Ronan's phone buzzed on the counter. He must have left it behind on his way out. The screen was still unlocked, a TikTok app half open. My thumb hovered. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. There I was, sitting in the corner of the living room, holding Miriam's photo. The angle was distant, like someone filming from behind a door frame. My voice, shaky but audible. "What would you do, Miriam? Because I'm lost." Then the caption scrolled below. "Grandpa still thinks dead people give advice." Classic. The video had 22,000 views. The comments were worse. "Is this staged or real? Old folks be living in ghost mode. Creepy, but kinda wholesome. My chest tightened, not from shame, but from something colder. Dismissal. I wasn't just the man they pushed aside. I was content now, something to be consumed and laughed at. That night, I waited until everyone had finished dinner and retreated upstairs. Then I found Ronan in the den, scrolling on a different device, likely unaware of what he'd left behind. I stood in the doorway. He looked up. "You posted that?" I asked. He blinked. "It was a joke. You don't even use TikTok." I stepped in, calm but certain. "But others do. And now, I'm not just a burden. I'm a punchline." He didn't respond, didn't even look ashamed, just shrugged slightly, like he'd been caught rearranging furniture, not rearranging my dignity. I walked away without raising my voice. I wasn't angry, just tired of needing to be. Later that night, I was wiping down the dining table when Denton's iPad vibrated on the counter. I didn't mean to see the message, but the screen lit up so clearly. It felt almost intentional. Tamara's name, her words. "Once he's gone, make sure utilities and title are moved same week. Mom and Dad will cover bridge financing." I read it again, then once more. There was no anger left in me, no shock, just a slow, steady breath that came from someplace so deep it hurt. I spoke aloud to no one. So I was never meant to be part of the haven, just its funding. I closed the iPad, wiped the counter once more, and walked upstairs. In the bedroom, I opened the small closet, pulling down the bin where I'd kept the old albums, the wedding photos, the house deed, even a brochure from the builder who laid the foundation with me back in '87. I wasn't packing to leave. I was collecting the parts of my life they didn't bother asking about. I labeled the box with a black Sharpie. What they forgot, I remembered. Carlton had called earlier, said the apartment Ruben arranged was ready. 2 days from now, I'd be in a space of my own. Not a palace. Not this house. But not theirs either. Before bed, I took a notepad from the drawer and scribbled a few words, folded the paper in thirds, and left it at the center of the dining table. "Thank you for making it clear. I'm not bitter. I'm awake. That's more than I can say for some of you." I didn't sign it, just placed one of the spare backdoor keys on top of it and turned off the lights. I didn't slam the door when I left the room, but I didn't close it gently either. 3 mornings had passed since the papers were signed. The wind off the bay felt lighter, though maybe that was just me. I had stopped pacing, stopped wondering who I was in my own house. Now, I was just a man waiting for a clean exit. That Tuesday, there was a knock on my guest house door. It was Denton, holding 2 mugs of coffee. His eyes looked older than last week. He handed me one without speaking. We sat on the porch. "Maybe we rushed things," he said finally, his voice quieter than I'd heard in years. "You didn't have to go this far." "Dad." I took a sip. It was cold already. "Did you ever plan to stop it before I did?" He looked away, chewing on nothing, letting silence do the explaining. The coffee cooled between us like 2 things that had both seen better mornings. Later that afternoon, the landline rang, an oddity these days. I picked up. "Lyle, it's Tamara." Her tone was smooth, as if layered in something artificial. I wanted to say, maybe we should have handled things differently. But maybe, if you're willing, we could still pause the transfer. There's still time to cancel it. No hard feelings. I didn't interrupt. I let her finish. She continued, a bit too practiced. "I think you're emotional right now. This isn't how families solve things." I let the words sit, and then I answered, "You're right. It's how businesses resolve fraud." She didn't say another word before hanging up. I didn't expect her to. That evening, Carlton called. It's done, he said. Confirmed. Ruben's name is on the title. Funds cleared. He paused, his voice softening. The beach apartment's ready. Lyle. Ruben said the guest house reno will take about 8 weeks. Until then, you're covered. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel like I had to fight it just to breathe. I don't feel like I won. I admitted, but I don't feel like I lost either. You didn't, Carlton said. You walked out of a burning room before the smoke got into your lungs. That night, I began packing. Not the kind of packing they expected, though. I wasn't disappearing. I was preserving. I pulled down a small box from the top shelf in the closet. Inside, a stack of old concert stubs, letters Miriam had written when we were first dating, a pressed napkin from the night she said yes. I held them one by one, not as relics, but as anchors. Then, gently, I repacked them into a smaller box, one I'd carry with me. I left only a single photo frame on the nightstand, the one with Miriam smiling in the sun. It didn't matter that the room looked stripped. What mattered was that I wasn't. The next morning, I walked through the house for the last time. I didn't need to say goodbye. The walls had already heard enough. In Brielle's room, I slipped a folded note under a stack of her notebooks. I knew she'd find it eventually. You saw everything. I hope someday you'll understand it all. In the kitchen, Tamara stood by the sink, washing dishes she didn't dirty. Her mother's voice could be heard faintly from the dining room. No one stopped me. No one offered a word. Outside, Carlton was waiting with his car. The trunk was already open. I placed my bags inside and looked back once, not for them, not for closure, just to remind myself that it had all happened, that I didn't imagine it. Carlton pulled away, slowly. I thought I'd feel vindicated. I told him, I just feel clear. Sometimes, he said, eyes on the road. The best endings aren't loud, they're just clean. I nodded. The town blurred behind us as the bay came into view. I hadn't started over yet, but I had finally stopped being erased. The apartment was small, but it opened wide enough for the morning sun to drape the walls without asking. The first thing I did when I walked in was open the window. The sea breeze swept in like it belonged there, like it had always waited to be let in. The salt air clung gently to the edges of the curtains, and I said out loud, "It smells like a start, not like loss." I placed the framed photo of Miriam on the shelf by the kitchen window, facing the water. It didn't feel like I was placing her in a new home. It felt like I was bringing her somewhere she was already welcome. That was new. By midweek, I had fallen into a rhythm. Mornings on the balcony with black coffee and a folded newspaper. Afternoons reading or making slow meals. The sound of the waves had its own language, one that never shouted, only insisted. That Thursday, a knock. I opened the door, and there stood Brielle. No warning, no text, no mother trailing behind. She held up a small white box. "I baked," she said. "Don't get excited. It's from a mix." We sat on the balcony, the ocean a quiet rhythm behind our silence. She picked at the edge of the cupcake wrapper. "I didn't stop it," she said eventually. I didn't speak up. I didn't need her to cry, to apologize. I needed honesty. And she gave it. "You didn't lie." I told her. "That's already more than most." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening but steady. It just got so loud, and I didn't know what part I was supposed to play anymore. "You don't have to play anything," I said. "Not with me." We watched the tide pull back from the sand. She stayed another hour. We didn't say much more, but we didn't need to. The next day, Reuben arrived carrying rolled-up blueprints and a large thermos of tea. Didn't trust the coffee on the way, he joked. We unrolled the new designs for the guest house on the kitchen table. I expected the same cold precision as before, but this time the lines bent gently, with intention. There was a study facing west, and a narrow porch with 2 chairs drawn in, looking toward the sunset. Reuben pointed at the margin and said, "You deserve a place that listens back when you talk to it." That evening, Carlton and Reuben stayed for dinner. I made beef stew, Miriam's recipe, complete with the rosemary she always swore was too much, but used anyway. The apartment filled with that old smell I hadn't realized I missed. The 3 of us sat at the small table, the windows open. Laughter rose, not forced, not polite, just natural, somewhere between refilling the bowls and unrolling stories. I realized something. I hadn't lost my family. I had simply stopped waiting for it to arrive in a certain shape. Family didn't always come with last names or obligations. Sometimes, it came through people who held a truth with you, who saw your bruises and didn't rush to patch them up, just sat nearby and stayed. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was Denton. His voice was lower than usual, not heavy, just slower, like he'd been carrying words too long. "Tamara's been talking about contesting the sale," he said. "I told her not to. Told her it'd only make things worse." I waited. He didn't add more, so I spoke. "This isn't about houses, Denton. It never was. It's about remembering who I am. And I think you forgot." He didn't argue. And for once, neither did I. After the call, I stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cool, the moon sharp. I opened my notebook and wrote a sentence on the next blank page. There are moments when silence is not surrender, it's mastery. The sea murmured beyond the railing, steady, sure, unapologetic. I stood there a while, watching nothing in particular. The guest house wasn't built yet, but I had already moved in somewhere deeper. Reuben drove me himself that morning. The sun had only just climbed out of the bay, soft light spilling through the oaks lining the edge of the lot. We didn't talk much during the ride, just the sound of old jazz playing low from the dash and the occasional bump in the road. When the guest house came into view, I saw it all at once, cedar siding still golden with newness, a wide porch facing west, a screen door that creaked faintly like it had already known me. He parked, stepped out, and handed me the keys not ceremoniously, not with some grand line about new beginnings. Just simple. Reuben always knew the difference between sentiment and truth. I walked in alone. The living room opened warmly, bright with sunlight bouncing off pale wood floors. A small fireplace sat in the corner, cold but waiting. I dropped my suitcase near the door, walked to the wall opposite the windows, and hung the photo of Miriam just beneath the light switch. I didn't just survive. I said, my voice quieter than I expected. I arrived. The armchair in the corner was brand new, but it was shaped like the old one I used to sit in every night with Denton tucked under my arm, asking why stars didn't fall. I touched the curve of its armrest and smiled. This time, there was no child listening, no one waiting on my lap or my voice to carry a story. But I didn't need that. I didn't need to be witnessed to exist. Midday, a knock came. Brielle again. No announcement, no pretext, just her and a small photo frame. Inside it, me, Miriam, and her, at maybe 5, on that main pier where Miriam taught her to spot seals. "They're still trying to explain everything to everyone," she said, sitting across from me on the porch. "Mom stopped doing interviews." I raised an eyebrow. "Truth doesn't need a podcast." She laughed softly. "No, it doesn't. I didn't ask her to pick sides. She was already here. Later that afternoon, as shadows stretched across the yard, I found a small envelope in the mailbox, hand-addressed. I opened it standing right there in the fading light. Dad, it read, "You were always the stronger one. I just didn't know strength could look like stillness. Denton, no apology, no excuses." But for the first time, I saw something in his words that had been missing for years: respect. I folded the letter gently and slid it beneath the frame of Miriam by the window. It didn't answer everything, but it said enough. That evening, Reuben dropped by again. This time, he brought 2 cold beers and no blueprints. We sat on the porch as the sun slid behind the dunes. He pointed at a hawk circling overhead. "Funny how justice doesn't always come from courts." I nodded. "Sometimes it just looks like peace." We didn't need to rehash the chaos. We'd both seen it, survived it. It no longer had to be named to be acknowledged. When he left, I stayed out on the porch. The sky was tinged with lavender and coral now. I pulled my notebook from the side table and wrote what had been waiting to be said. Forgiveness is not always given. Sometimes, it's just chosen by the one who walks away. I closed the notebook and set it beside me. The porch creaked when I stood, like a gentle exhale. I turned toward the horizon where the day was dying, not in defeat, but in completion. I had been kicked out, but I didn't just come back. I came home to the part of myself no one could steal.